Alright, so today we're going to be talking about other types of equations again. And we're going to be talking about applications involving radicals, which means word problems. Okay, so what you want to do is write the given formula, make sure you understand what each variable represents, plug in whatever information they give you to the corresponding variable, solve for the remaining variable, and then make sure your answers make sense, and check for extraneous solutions. So it says, the graph in figure 1.29 shows the average number of hours per week spent watching TV by annual income. The formula, h equals negative 2.3 square roots of I plus 67.6, models weekly television viewing time h in hours. So h is the number of hours that we watch TV. And I represents the annual income. So if they give me an income, I'm going to plug it in there. If they give me a number of hours, I'm going to plug it in there. It says what annual income, so they're asking me to find I, corresponds to 44.6 hours per week watching TV. That's an H. So they're telling me to plug this in for H. So I say 44.6 equals negative 2.3 square roots of I plus 67.6. My job is to get x alone now, or I mean I alone. So I'm going to subtract 67.6, and I would get 44.6 minus 67.6 is negative 23 equals negative 2.3 square roots of I. To isolate that radical, I'm going to divide by negative 2.3, and I get 10 equals the square root of I. So now, to get rid of the radical, we've isolated it. Now we can square it to kill it, but I got to do it to both sides. And I get I equals 100. So it says I in thousands of dollars. If you watch 44.6 hours of TV, your income is going to be $100,000. Okay. And let's see if it makes sense. According to this, people that make $25,000 watch 56.3 hours of TV per week. 35,000, 51, 45,000, 50, 55,000, 49. They're going down. So for 44.6, it's going to be over here somewhere because it's lower. And does it make sense that it would be over here at 100? And yes, it makes sense. All right, and you can tell I can actually type it in the calculator. What you can do is you can type, you know how I put 44.6 in here? You could type that in for Y1. And type this in for y2. Of course, you'd have to use x instead of I. And then you calculate the intersection point, and you can see they intersect at x equals 100, y equals 44.6, which tells me the income is 100 grand when the hours of TV are 44.6. This was the income. This was the hours watching TV. All right, so you try this one. Hit pause. Come back when you're ready. And hopefully you got 19 hours. It says, for a culture of 40,000 bacteria of a certain strain, the number of bacteria N that will survive X hours, so X represents the number of hours, is modeled by this formula, and N represents the number of bacteria. So they give me this formula, and it says after how many hours, that's my X, will 36,000 bacteria survive, and that's my N, because N represents the number of bacteria that will survive. So since they're giving me an N, I need to plug it in here. So I put 36,000 equals 4,000 square roots of 100 minus X. To solve this, I've got to isolate the radical, so I'm going to divide by 4,000. And that gives me 9. Yep, 9 equals the square root of 100 minus x. So now that I've isolated it, I can kill it by squaring both sides. That gives me 81 equals 100 minus x. To get x alone now, I'm going to minus 100, which gives me negative 19 equals negative x. Divide by negative 1, and x equals 19. Again, I can also type 36,000. Again, just up here when I plugged it in, I can type this side in for y1, this side in for y2, and then I'm going to have to change my window, obviously, okay, because this is going to be a horizontal line up at 36,000 on the y-axis. So I changed my y-min to start at negative 5, but I went all the way up to 45,000, and I counted by 10,000s. And you can see the intersection point over here is when x is 19 and y is 36,000. Okay, so there's the number of hours and there's the number of bacteria. Alright, so try this one. Hit pause, come back when you're ready, and hopefully you get number 2. It says a formula for the length of a diagonal from the upper corner of a box to the opposite lower corner is, there's the length of the diagonal, the square root of the length squared plus the width squared plus the height squared. It says find the length of the diagonal box, the length of the diagonal of the box if the length is 22 inches. So they're telling me to change L to 22. The width is 14, so they're telling me to change W to 14, and the height is 9, so they're telling me to change H to 9. If I type in 22 squared plus 14 squared plus 9 squared, you get 761. So the diagonal is the square root of 761. Now, you can type that in the calculator and get a decimal equivalent, but their answers are in radical form, so my answer is the square root of 761. Okay, try this one. That shouldn't be there. Merry Christmas. Alright, it says for a cone, the formula R equals the square root of 3v over pi h describes the relationship between the radius r, so r is radius, v is volume, and height is h. Find the volume, so they're asking me to find v. If the radius is 9, so they're telling me to plug in 9 here, and the cone is 11 inches high, so they're telling me to plug in 11 there. And they want me to use 3.14 as an approximation for pi. So if I plug everything in, I have 9 equals the square root of 3v over 3.14 times 11. Okay, so my radical is isolated, so I'm going to go ahead and kill it by squaring it. Sorry, I wanted a different color there. By squaring it, but I'm going to do it to both sides. That gives me 81 equals 3v over whatever 3.14 times 11 is, which is 34.54. Now, to get v alone, I'm going to kill the fraction, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 34.54. And I get 2797.74 equals 3v. And now to get v alone, I'm going to divide by 3. And I get my volume is 932.58, which would round to 932.6. Okay? Alright, so try this one. Hit pause, come back when you're ready, and hopefully you got 3. It says a formula used to determine the velocity v, so v is velocity, in feet per second of an object, neglecting air resistance after it has fallen a certain height, is this formula, where g is the acceleration due to gravity, h is the height of the object has fallen. If the acceleration g due to gravity on Earth is approximately 32 feet per second, so they're telling me to plug in 32 for g, per second, find the velocity, so they're asking me to find v, of a bowling ball after it has fallen 30 feet, and that's my height. So if I plug everything in, I'm finding velocity equals the square root of 2 times gravity, which is 32, times the height, which is 30. And if I plug that into the calculator, the square root of 2 times 32 times 30 is 43.817, blah, blah, blah. And if you round, the 1 won't do anything to the 8. Okay? Alright, so how are extraneous solutions related to the domain? They have to be excluded. Why do application problems involving square roots usually limited to the first quadrant? Well, most word problems are limited to the first quadrant because everything in the first quadrant is positive, and generally when you're talking about real-world situation, negatives don't make any sense. So usually that's why, as far as application, that they're limited to the first quadrant. Also, because of the plus or minus thing, and you can't have a negative under there, everything is always limited to the first quadrant when you talk about square roots. Alright, so we are at homework, which means we are done. So, happy homeworking, and I will see you next time.